Hi, my name is Allison Forbes and this is my presentation on the Philippines. These are just a few images that I pulled just kind of representing the Philippines, showing kind of the breakdown of all of the different islands and areas of the Philippines. To the right is going to be the Filipino flag, and then this is just showing some of the beautiful nature that the Philippines has to offer. So the culture of the Philippines. My culture guide was a nurse that I currently work with who was born and raised in the Philippines. She also went to nursing school there and trained as a nurse in the Philippines for a couple of years before moving here to the United States. As I discussed on the previous slide, the Philippines are made of a bunch of small islands. They do have a national language in which everybody speaks, but then each area has their own dialect. And what I found most interesting is that each area typically does not understand the other's dialect. So that's why it's very important that they do have that national language that everybody does speak. Another thing that was pretty interesting to me was that their schools are fully taught in English, so it is expected that once a child starts school that they are almost fluent in English in order to learn and be able to keep up with the education while in school. Family is the number one priority in the Filipino culture. They typically will buy a big piece of property, and then all of the family, including extended family, will then build on this property, and they will each have their individual huts in which they will live in, and typically they'll have one large house that kind of the head of the family lives in, so the grandparents typically will be the head of that group. They also provide for any family members that cannot work any longer or that are sick. So, for instance, my culture guide lives over here but also sends money back frequently to help provide for her brother who is unable to work and her parents that are now retired. So it's just part of their culture to be very family oriented and to really provide for anything that their family may need. Filipinos also have a very long and deep history of traditions. Layla explained that these traditions, although some of them are still practiced, typically more of the younger generation is kind of starting to come away from that as it becomes more modernized in the Philippines. She says that you will find those deep traditions in the more rural areas where they are still living as tribes, but it's more the bigger traditions that are followed in today's society. So the most significant part of the interview that I really kind of found, again, the extent of the importance of family. I mean, I know for me, family is a huge importance for me. I really appreciate my time with my family. I try to make the most of my time with my family. However, just the difference in how we view the importance of our families to kind of what they do for their family is very different to me, as far as really providing for everybody in your family. So like your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, that's a little bit different for me versus over there the way they view their family. The next thing that I found very interesting was the importance and celebration of New Year's. So over there, New Year's is a very big deal. Some of the traditions that they follow is, to the right you will see a basket filled with a bunch of different kinds of round fruit. So this is a very common tradition, and you're supposed to have at least 13 kinds of round fruit present at a table the night of the New Year's celebration. This is indicative of a fruitful year moving forward, and that it will be very plentiful in money and in food and health and wealthiness. The next thing that they do is they will typically come with change in their pockets, and this again is just signifying that it will be a wealthy year for the next coming year. And they will also wear a bunch of clothing with polka dots on. So again, sticking with that theme of everything circular, everything round, having a whole, fruitful, and wealthy new year. And then lastly, they also do shoot off fireworks, as we do here sometimes in celebration. However, theirs is more to ward off the bad spirits or the bad luck, and hopefully keep that away for the upcoming year. The last thing that really kind of stuck out to me, probably just because of our professions, was the differences in healthcare and nursing over there. Healthcare over there, it's similar in the aspect that people do go to hospitals, they do have hospitals, they have clinics, but it's just kind of how the treatment is done over in the Philippines. Layla explained to me that typically nurses can write prescriptions. Their scope of practice is a little bit more broad than ours is. She said that when they write prescriptions, it can just be on any generic piece of paper. There's no such thing as a script pad. And as long as you know a doctor's name and you sign it for them, the pharmacist does not have any care where it came from. The other thing that I found very interesting was that they will typically prescribe antibiotics for anything. So if you go into the clinic or the hospital and say that you have a runny nose, something so basic and so minor, they'll automatically write you a prescription for antibiotics, and not just kind of like a smaller antibiotic. They usually typically go to the big ones and go for like the Z-Pack right away. So she said, once coming over here, that was a big change for her because, when she gets sick, she expects to take antibiotics, and that antibiotics will help to cure her. Whereas here, we use those kind of a little bit more scarce in order to not build up a tolerance to the antibiotics. Differences between our cultures. She said the things that she, I guess, mostly kind of picked up on are the differences that she learned when she moved to our country. Her biggest one was how we greet one another. So over there, it is a very formal greeting. They typically say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And traditionally, anybody that is higher ranking than you in your job or just kind of society in general, you will always use ma'am and sir. You will never use their first names. And then also anybody that is classified as your elder, typically a greeting, you would take their hand and you would kiss it and then place it on their forehead. And this is just out of respect for those that are classified as your elders. Whereas here, she said her first kind of incidents with this was when a nurse was passing and said, "Hey, how's it going?" and just kept kind of walking. She said it came across as being so rude that she just didn't understand why somebody would do it. And so then she kept noticing that this happened more and more, that people would kind of walk by and say, "Hey, how's it going?" or "Hey, how are you doing?" but not really stop to converse and actually listen to how she was doing. She then understood that this is just kind of our typical greeting. It's, just very casual, kind of passing by, "Hey, how's it going?" So she eventually kind of learned to adapt to that. Next was the lack of traditions per se. We do have our holidays, and during those holidays, we all have our certain traditions. But she just said that in general, there aren't really many traditions in everyday life. She said that was just kind of interesting to her, which I can kind of see. We are a melting pot of different cultures here in the United States, and so to have kind of one main tradition would be pretty tough to come by considering all of the different mix of people that we have here. Lastly, would be our abbreviations and pronunciations. Um, Over there in the Philippines, again, they do start off learning English very early on in life. However, um, they are taught the kind of worldwide accepted abbreviations. But she said over here we tend to abbreviate everything, no matter what it is. And she said so it kind of took her a long time to figure out what those abbreviations were and trying to decipher, is this abbreviation for this, or is this, now a different abbreviation? And then she also said that the pronunciations are different here than what they learn over in the Philippines. Not that theirs are correct versus ours, obviously, but she said that their pronunciations, when they're taught in school, are just very different than they are over here. So it took her some time to kind of reacclimate and kind of learn those new pronunciations. So my personal and professional development over this course. I would say, it really opened my eyes to the differences in cultures and how impactful it can be on a person. We kind of forget when we're over here in the United States, just kind of our day to day life, that this isn't a norm for everybody. This isn't their normal culture. And, people really, really put so much emphasis and so much importance in their culture. And I think we need to do as a whole and as just a society in general, we need to do a better job of learning somebody else's culture and really kind of embracing that and learning how to maybe change our practices and our ways to hopefully help them feel a little bit more comfortable. Uh, Next, I would say just how much being culturally competent can improve patient care. Um, I have learned a lot about just cultural sensitivity and changing my practice in terms of, kind of being culturally sensitive to a person, especially since moving here to Minnesota and working very closely with a lot of the Hmong culture. Um, so this was not very impactful at my last job, or I should say, it was not explained or really taught much at all at my last hospital. And so it has been really nice to learn just how much some of those simple little changes that you can make for a patient to hopefully accommodate some of their culture and how we can maybe help to adhere to some of those traditions that they use in their culture. And then lastly, learning how to approach nursing with a mind of being culturally sensitive. Again, going back to just learning somebody's culture, we can't be expected to learn every single culture that's all over the world. It would just be merely impossible. But kind of being mindful of, okay, hey, I noticed that I'm really working a lot with, the Hmong culture, the Korean culture. How can I learn and how can I kind of expand my knowledge on their cultures in order to be more sensitive and able to kind of help them feel more comfortable while they're a patient in this hospital? Changing my nursing practice. So, first off, just to be mindful of someone's culture, but still approach each patient as an individual. I think that was kind of a big thing for me. Again, going back to that Hmong culture, we know a general broad spectrum of what their typical traditions are in the Hmong culture while they're in the hospital and what they typically like to follow. However, it's truly important that we don't always assume that a person is going to follow those exact cultural aspects. If we do that, we could end up offending somebody instead of really trying to be helpful, which is what ultimately we were intending to do. So it's important to just approach a patient ask them their preferences and kind of just acclimate yourself to what they are going to need as an individual. Next is just continuing to learn and develop and understand some of those primary cultures that come to our hospital. Again, learning the Hmong culture, the Karen culture, Somali culture. Those are kind of the three big ones for my hospital. But if I were to move, I would really want to kind of take note and maybe ask ahead of time, hey, what are some of those bigger cultural groups that you tend to see at your hospital? So I can then, go ahead and learn some of their practices and traditions and get myself a little bit of background knowledge before going into patient care. Lastly, developing ways to make changes and accommodations to patient care in order to adhere to as many customs as possible. So, this was kind of a new one for me again when I started working at this hospital. Something so basic, but it was something that stuck out to me from the get-go. The Hmong culture tends to want to follow a warm diet after giving birth, and so postpartum, they aren't allowed to drink or partake in anything that is cold, and so a big thing for postpartum patients is we need them to drink water. And so most of the Hmong culture will ask you to give them warm water. I mean, it is something so simple, but something we may not initially think about. When somebody asks for water, I ask ice or no ice. I don't ever ask if they would prefer warm water. But these are just some of these small little changes that we can make to our patient care in order to accommodate someone's culture. So I think that's a really important thing that nurses in general should take into consideration and really kind of grow their knowledge in. And thank you so much for listening.